What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode. Brian, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you.
Thanks, Ricardo. Glad to be here. Glad to be here for sure.
Now, I said I would give a little bit of a backstory. So for those of you who don't know Brian Gardner, if you visit his website, it'll humbly say that he's a Chicago-based web designer, one of my favorite cities, by the way, a WordPress expert and a digital marketing consultant, and the now founder of a company called Agent Engine. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to understate the awesomeness of who we have on the show today. Brian's the founder of a company called Studio Press. You guys recently sold the WP Engine, and we can kind of get into that. Mm-hmm. But it's one of the largest theme development companies and really a leader in the WordPress space. So that's all you.
Guilty as charged.
Awesome. Why don't, for those of us, I know my agents know WordPress. They probably don't know the story of kind of Studio Press and your background. Mm-hmm. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about that, your story, and then we'll get into kind of what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, so 2006-ish, I was working at an architectural firm as a project manager. We had an office of about 20 predominantly older people. I was significantly younger than most, so I sort of adopted the computer IT guy, even though just by default, because nobody else knew anything about computers. And so I was sort of leaned on as the computer guy. And so through that, I kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense where like I learned a lot about the computer just so that I could be the computer guy. And so part of that was just spending time online, kind of, screwing around on just various things that related to technology and computers and stuff like that. So one of that, at the same point, I wanted to start a blog, and so I created a blogger from Google.
Gosh,
they had free
remember
blogs.
Those days.
Software. Yes, Blogspot, I think, was actually the address. But it wasn't doing what I wanted it to. So the short story is somebody recommended I look into WordPress. I looked into WordPress. I figured out how to do things, set up a install of WordPress, hosting, all that kind of stuff just through Google, learning how to set it all up. And just started playing around with the theming because I didn't realize it back then, but I really had an interest in design, which sort of blossomed over the last 15 years to the point where it's at now. And so I started messing around with the themes, the CSS, and just the files just to kind of tweak things and just see how I could make it look better because I wanted my blog to look different than, the library of themes that were, pretty much. I guess maybe even back then I wanted to stand out. So I learned how to code WordPress themes. I created a couple of free themes. I used those as distribution for my name and incoming links and stuff like that. And through that, a couple people would reach out and say, hey, I downloaded your theme. Can I pay you to do some customization? So for a little while there, it was sort of the moonlighting vacation fund. And then a real estate agent, ironically, from Boston, asked if I would do a custom theme. And I put together something that I thought was really cutting edge for WordPress and groundbreaking. Yeah. And, he was like, this is great, but I actually just need a blog theme. I don't need a whole website looking theme. And I was like, okay, well, what should I do with this? And you know the story. And for those who don't, the original Revolution theme was a rejected design by a real estate agent. And so we can all thank him for that. And so then I asked my audience if people would buy it, and they said yes. And I asked how much, and started selling Revolution WordPress theme. That evolved into Studio Press. Lots of, sections of chapters here we're skipping over. But so Studio Press became a thing, and we merged that into Copyblogger, which for those who don't know, it's super, as you were part of that as well at one point, content marketing and information on digital stuff. So
yeah, and I don't want to understate this. We're not talking, a couple of freelance projects here and there. We're talking about a whole ecosystem of websites powered by Studio Press and the Genesis framework. So
yes,
you know your stuff.
Several 100,000 customers. Put it that way.
So awesome. The topic that we kind of want to talk about is building a real estate brand. So your new venture, Agent Engine. Why real estate first and foremost?
So last summer, when I was in my proverbial wilderness after we had sold the WP Engine, and I was freelancing again, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, You know some of the story behind Agent Press, which was sort of our first iteration of real estate specific stuff back in the day. We two different attempts. We sort of kind of ran into that. We just had so many things going on. We just never fully went there. So first and foremost, there was always an element of I knew that there was potential in real estate and technology and WordPress back in the day. And so by nature of that, it was kind of the first, okay, well, maybe here's a market to consider. I tried looking into or feeling good about other markets. And to be perfectly honest, I just couldn't shake real estate. I'm like, there's something about real estate. We've bought and sold 10 houses over the last 15 years. So I know the process. We have a lot of friends who are agents.
Right.
People like you, we've made some really good connections over the years into the industry. So like,
yeah.
And I'll be honest, as a designer and somebody who loves to design and as a personal branding person, I was like, there's no better industry right now that's severely lacking good design and emphasis on the personal brand than real estate. So I knew I could go in and make a huge difference right away.
That's awesome. I could feel that, and I could see that wholeheartedly. It's easy to jump in, but then you realize there's a lot of moving parts to being an entrepreneur. You got to, build a brand, but also hunt for your next commission. Like, where do you start? What do you do? There's just a lot going on.
It is, and it's tough right now, even for us, because agents, their bandwidth right now to do anything outside of just the status quo in their business because of the market is really, really minimal. Like They don't have time. They don't have a need for digital presence right now. They don't want to think about it because it's just, why bother at this point when things are going crazy? Now, of course, the counter argument there is that, 6 months from now when the market goes back to normal and there's now more competition because everyone just got into real estate, there will be a need and a really important emphasis placed on the personal brand and building your personal enterprise, as we often talk sort of in the quote copy blogger-esque, vernacular. But yeah, it's important.
So you and I know, I mean, heck, I've been building my personal brand for years. You've built a whole business, and I'm building a personal brand. But why does it all start with a personal brand?
I only use the Jerry Maguire storyline here because I always do. I feel like there's always, it feels ubiquitous when you hear about personal branding and stuff like that. Like everyone's talking about it, and many people, oh yeah, Jerry Maguire, fewer clients, like all that kind of stuff. But there's some really truth to that. There's, people really want to work with people who are relational, people who are trustworthy, people who are just good people. And so, especially when it comes to buying and selling their home, I mean, that's a very intimate, personal transaction. And it's probably one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one they'll ever do. And so it's, buying a car is one thing. You can kind of get through that without really caring too much about the person you're working with. But when you are selling a home that you've lived in for 30 years, or you want to buy a home that you're going to start your family in, that's a pretty important you want
to know that
life.
You trust this person, and you want to know that they have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, and so either they're like-minded, either they're they're established, they know the local area. That like there's always some element there. Now, of course, brokerages and companies and sort of the high-level franchises and stuff like that, they in themselves also need to have branding matter, right? Compass is a good example of a brand that's gone after a very specific sort of perception.
Yeah.
And like it does. People follow people who they are attracted to, not just physically, but just from any kind of the way they operate, the way they talk, the way they communicate, their morals, their standards. And people follow, social media is a really good example of a vehicle in which you can get a window into someone's life without even having a chance to meet them yet. So,
yeah. So how does one go about starting to build their sort of brand presence? Is it really just, because I get this question a lot. So the question that I get, maybe one back to the other, is, Ricardo, do I really need a website today? And I kind of laugh when I get that question. My answers maybe have changed over the years. But it's not just, the other challenge is I had this website from this provider. I didn't really get anything out of it, so let me switch to another provider. Like, who do you recommend has the best website? And I feel like those are maybe asking the wrong questions.
Like, first of all, let's define what a website is, because they're, some people think I have Facebook, therefore I have a website. And in many cases, a Facebook page could serve that purpose.
Sure.
Not necessarily the smartest thing to do. We can talk about digital sharecropping at any given moment. Facebook can close down your account, and then you're left
Dead in the water.
high and dry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I always sort of recommend the diversified portfolio approach when it comes to being online. Social media is important, and there's a whole lot of positives that come with social media, the distribution, the ability to, broadcast and have people follow you and stuff like that. So I'm certainly not talking about that not being important. So
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram, even LinkedIn on some level. But at the end of the day, you should always own your content, or at least have a place where you can own your content and have a direct path to sort of capturing
An audience.
that contact information.
Yeah.
The audience.
Yeah, no, 100% own your content. Own your space. In other words, always have an asset that you own and control. I've always said.
Yeah, and I always like to recommend using social media to distribute that content.
Yep.
Right. Don't let that be the place where you put it all, but like start with yourself, your website, wherever your blog, whatever it might be, and then use social media to broadcast that.
I forget the name of the book, but I think it was HubSpot. That old inbound marketing book. So the whole hub and spokes model.
Yes,
Your
totally.
hub is your website, and everything else is your distribution network.
Yep.
So okay. How do you approach it, like a website project and a personal branding project? It's more than just kind of the tech and what goes behind it, right?
Yeah, like I think a lot of people think a lot of different, as I have to have a website and so told me to do this, and I see other people doing that. Sort of
100%.
The reason why I created no sidebar, which is a complete and total right field topic, was because people would litter their sidebars with stuff that they thought they needed to have, right? Like I'm an intentional person. And I think when it comes to digital presence, you should have what you want on your website and what makes sense for you and your business, not whatever. I mean, listen to what other people are doing or those who have succeeded ahead of you recommend. But again, don't listen to anybody who says you should have this, and this on your website. At some point, you got to do what's right.
I kind of think always take advice with a grain of salt, right? Not the same thing isn't going to work for everyone, or the same thing isn't going to work for you.
Yeah, or, like I always look at the sheep jumping off the cliff, right? Just because the sheep's jumping off the cliff doesn't mean that you should do the same thing they're doing ahead of you.
Right.
And so, sort of I guess it's the Wayne Gretzky quote, right? Don't skate. A good hockey player skates to where the puck is. A great one skates to where it's going to be. So on some level, blazing the trail and pioneering within your industry is good, which means you do things that people haven't done before. And maybe that's one of the things that set you apart. When it comes to the personal brand and the website, there's this kind of a two-part thing. It's like the first identity, like who you are, your voice, what sort of vibe you want to send out there, even as granular as fonts and colors and kind of all of that, right? Like I'm a minimalist guy, that about me. And so someone were to come to me and say like, how do you want this to look? I would say, well, first of all, lots of white space, like topography matters, and like not a lot of heavy use of color. Like that's just my vibe. And so
Right.
Naturally it's people's house is the same way, right? They're either farmhouse or they're Mediterranean, so identify your own taste as well, because that sort of will bring in people that are like-minded.
You'll track that audience, like-minded audience.
Yes. So logo and branding and colors and kind of like the preliminary work, which is ahead of setting up a website, right? Just identifying what's the purpose of what I'm trying to do here. Is it going to be to show my listings? Is it going to be to talk about local areas of interest, which would establish me sort of as an authority? We also sort of consider that the hyper-local approach. Or do I just want to blog about my expertise in the field in general, right? Because, there's strategies for the types of content you share. And then once you have a better idea of, what you want to do with your website, then of course it's going out and finding either the right platform to use or finding someone who either can do a custom design for you, or if you're working on a budget, maybe it's just a free theme to start, just to have something out there. And if that's the case, what's the theme that best works with the kind of content and the kind of look you're going after?
Do you always start with content first, or do you recommend starting with content first?
It kind of depends. Like a content plan more than content itself. Like if you knew, hey, I'm not going to write, but I'm going to do something different, which is like just launch with a podcast. That sort of changes how you would view a website. Maybe you don't need a website. Maybe you use something like Transistor's just podcast player page website thing that they have and start with that, right? You don't want to invest into something because someone told you need to do it and you find out that you really don't need it. So the plan, I think, is ahead of the content itself.
Now, you bring up a good point. I think focus on a content type that works well for you. The reason I do this podcast is because lately for me, it's been easier to get on the microphone and either talk straight into the microphone or have a conversation with somebody like you. It's easier to ship that content and produce it. I have agents that who I've had on the show. So Jeb Smith, literally when the pandemic started last year, all he did was he sat down in front of the camera, forced himself Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to record a 5-9 minute video. And it was just, I'm going to answer one question right now that relates to the questions people are asking me out in the field. So how long is this tight inventory situation going to last? How are rising interest rates going to affect the real estate market? Are rates going to continue to go up? Is the eviction moratorium, like how is that going to affect the real estate market? Are we going to have a bunch of foreclosures? Every day was, one piece of content that he forced himself to record. And he started the year with 200 subscribers, and he closed out the year with about 26,000 subscribers.
That's great.
It's wild.
That's a good story.
But it's, he sat down and I think created that content first. I think it's about creating content and answering questions that your consumers. I mean, real estate's hard right now. Real estate's crazy. I think buyers are having a hard time. They're tired. They're stressed. They're getting beat out in multiple offer situations. So that's stressful for people. Sellers are having a hard go at it. Where will I move with so little on the market to choose from? We want to sell, but where will we go next? Are you answering those questions and attracting an audience? We call it, it's just hyperlocal content marketing.
One thing as you were talking that makes sense to me also is not only do you need to identify what you, the content producer, feels comfortable with, but also doing it in a medium in which it can be consumed, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, Agent Engine, our company, we decided to launch a podcast because we realized our audience were our agents, and we presume that they spend a lot of time in the car, a lot of time at open houses, and just a lot of time sort of waiting for the next appointment or something to that nature. And so it's much easier to just hit a play button while you're at an open house or in the car or on the train going to your next showing than it is to like try to read something while you're driving in a car. So you kind of have like,
which you shouldn't be doing.
So exactly. But there's an element which is like, your consumers, what are they like? How are they likely to consume the content? Because if you spend all your time creating content in a way where people don't like to consume it, then that doesn't do you much good either.
So you brought up, figuring out your vibe. I'll link to this in the show notes, but we put together at West a brand archetype quiz. So I forget the URL for it, so I'll link to it in the show notes. It's a 12-question exercise. Just answer a couple of questions, and it'll tell you, what your brand archetype is. So it'll show you the kind of words that play well with your brand, the kind of colors and styles that resonate with your brand. So you can use that as a sort of branding guide for the style and vibe that you're trying to put together for your brand. I think that's a really good exercise. Brian, what other sort of founding principles or guidelines should we use when we're looking to build our personal brand or talking about building a personal brand and exuminating that through our website?
So the two words that come to my mind are authenticity and consistency. I think a lot of times people can sniff through when you're just putting on a show or trying to impress or doing all those other things. Me, I'm a huge fan of authenticity, just on several levels. Just being the real you, right? Just showing your colors. And That doesn't necessarily mean dumping the mess. It just means just really being who you are. But part of that also is the consistency part, which is, I am a certain way today, and I'm also that way tomorrow or next week or next month. And so like there's a little bit of, and especially when it comes to real estate,
with that client, with everyone.
yeah, for sure. Like you don't want to be known as the person who's all over the place, because then maybe you're seen as unreliable or not dependable, or
or you don't look organized.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, you've got your ducks lined up, and you've got and your business is intact and stuff like that, and people can see that from the outside, or even like from a review system. I mean, if you're unorganized or all over the place, and early one time, late then like next, then your reviews will reflect that, and then other people will know that that's how you do business. And so just authenticity, and in real estate, it's all about the sale, right? That's sort of the thing. But there's so much more to it than just the sale, because I'd rather kind of go through like a little bit more of an arduous process with somebody who's there with me and wants to walk that journey alongside me than just somebody who wants to just sell me something and then move on and find the next couple or whatever.
We had an agent told me a story once of how he went to a listing appointment, and day started off on the wrong foot for him. Leaves the listing appointment, and the mother had emailed the daughter or forwarded an email from the agent and accidentally CC'd him in the email. And it was, hey, just met with the agent, really nice guy. Up until this point, everything seemed great. But, a couple of different things. He just looks like he didn't have it together, or he feels like he doesn't have it together. And I don't know how I can have him represent me on the sale of my house if it just seems like he doesn't have it together. If he's not taking care of himself, how can he take care of me during this transaction? So
probably a sobering email to have come across, and maybe the best thing that ever happened to the guy. You never know.
Actually, the way he explains it, and I won't say who it is, but the way he explains it is actually, yeah, it was. It hurt at first, and I wanted to be upset and reply back and, be angry about it. But at the end of the day, she was right. If I'm not giving, if that's the impression that I'm giving people, then I'm just hurting myself. And, he took it as constructive criticism and, completely changed everything.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I think being authentic is important. And I think communicating that across all of your channels is super important too.
Yeah.
What else? So with Agent Engine, what's the, we've been through this iteration a couple of different times with like Agent Press. What's the evolution of what's the plan with Agent Engine?
So our original idea was to not just have another real estate website builder, right? There's several out there already, many of which I'm sure all the listeners use, and they're doing a great job. I also, at least through Agent Engine, didn't want to just do real estate WordPress themes, because I was trying to keep agents out of the back end of WordPress for reasons that you and I could probably spend three shows talking about. So we were really trying to just take sort of the ethos of simplicity and really, really good design and offer a way that agents can have a profile that ultimately allows them to create a single page website, primarily for those who are newer to the industry or just someone who's not online. And it would give them a sophisticated, stylish digital presence. Now, part of that process was doing a directory, a searchable directory in which this profile system could be a part of. And we were going to use the directory as just kind of a cool factor thing, but allows, really just sort of the extension of the profile. And so we thought point A was the directory, point B, where we want them to go, are these profiles in these websites. But the reality and what we learned is that there were far more people who were interested in the directory as a whole, the technology we had built for the directory piece, that we've sort of shifted a little bit towards what we're calling digital spaces. And these are, the profile management system, I guess, for lack of a better term, for real estate organizations like associations, brokerages, and just larger teams. And so Agent Engine now is really focused on building out customized I guess we could say white labeled versions of our directory for larger groups, because that was sort of the hole that we sort of accidentally stumbled upon, which is, there's great single page websites out there for people, but the directory system, the searchability, click on the agents page or something like that, like, or an association or an MLS, you try to find an agent and you can't. And what we built is so visual and so personal brand heavy, because there's make it look really, really good. You're like, wow, we can make it easy for agents to use, and they could really showcase their personal brand. For example, Kim Stegbauer, who is a real estate agent and a design decorator, interior designer. She's been on HTV and all this other stuff. She has a brand called Tomcat Real Estate in Chandler, Arizona, and she, her profile looks great because it shows the house that she decorated. It shows her picture. Like, there's just things about it that that's kind of, speaking to the vibe thing. It's a way for agents to show their vibe. If they're in Gig Harbor up in Washington, they can sort of say, hey, we're the $3 million lake house people. Like, you have a visual way to do that. And so we're excited about that. And so we're also excited about the digital spaces. And we're also going to be kind of segmenting and siloing our directory, our internal directory, to be called something else, where agents can come and buy a profile and use that as their thing. So sort of like the about.me, remember that from several years ago? Kind of the about me for agents. And so awesome. I won't share the URL yet, but we're on the verge of working through and launching that too.
Good way to kind of quickly and effortlessly showcase your brand and kind of your style and your work. Are you guys doing single property websites or no?
So as a byproduct of our profile system, the one that'll be available to individual agents are the ability to create listings. They basically incorporate the same template that the profiles do. And so you can sign up and get an account, and then, create as many listings as you want. They're all associated to your profile. And then you can custom domain them. So, like, for instance, if you have 123
Main Street,
sprucestreet.com or whatever, you could actually redirect that to the website. Or the single property websites as well.
Awesome. Well, you guys hear me talk about Facebook ads all the time and how you should point that traffic to your single property website. So, so that's awesome. What's your advice to somebody who's, I think you and I maybe would say the same thing, but what's your advice to somebody who's just getting started in the business, aside from, kind of identify what your style is, be consistent in your marketing, they're really trying to break out and build a personal brand? Where would you start?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any one place to start. It really is kind of starting everywhere and seeing what you like to do, what seems to be working. Some people, maybe it's, TikTok or Instagram stories or something like that. I mean, I've seen several agents doing research for Agent Engine who are absolutely crushing it on Instagram stories. They found something that works. They know how to produce it. And that's how they're becoming known as, like, and there's certain cities, even like Tampa. Tampa's a good example of a city where it's Instagram crazy when it comes to real
Really?
estate. So if you're in the Tampa area, you got to get on Instagram. You got to compete with all the the men and the ladies who are just, it's awesome. A thing. It's weird how that works out. But identifying, just, doing some level of research. I mean, just like what we did. Like, I clicked around Instagram, clicked on hashtags, see what people are doing, see how they're using it. And, you can learn a whole lot more than, like reading a blog post or seeing a manual, because reading a blog post on, you should have an Instagram account, versus
doing it,
going to Instagram and seeing how people are using it. Like, that's hands-on right there. You're watching people basically build their businesses. And so you emulate that. You don't copy it, you emulate it and do it in your own style. And if it works, then pour a little more gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, but don't pigeonhole yourself into, like, thinking you have to do it that way because everyone else is doing it that way.
Correct.
Definitely, like you said, see if it works, and if it does, pour some more gasoline on that fire. But yeah, find the content type that works for you, and don't fool yourself into thinking it has to be done this way.
Correct.
What other like challenges or mistakes do you see, or do you think agents are make, and like how can we avoid that? when we're I hear a lot of like shopping from tool to tool to tool. We're always jumping from tools to tools, chasing down like the next shiny object. What's your perception of that?
Yeah, like with WordPress, we're WordPress people, and there are several platforms to choose from. Some are free, some are paid for. It really kind of depends from agent to agent. If you're going to invest in your brand or invest heavily into a website, then use that stuff, or try to, plan out if that's part of your plan. I think a lot of times people say, "Oh, I have to have a website," so they drop 25 grand on a website, don't know what to do with it. Then it's like, okay, well, now they're behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And so kind of be slow and methodical, do research, find out what you want to do. And, it's easy advice to give, probably less easy to take. But in our own world, in your world, in my world, as creators, that's the same thing. Like I see you doing a podcast, and so in my head, I'm like, oh, podcast must be what I have to do.
Yeah.
But if I don't like doing it, at some point people will pick up on that, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's doing a podcast, but he doesn't sound excited about it. Things like that. It's just like it really is. And real estate in particular is an industry that's very sort of visual and eye candy. And I don't mean that in the derogatory sense, but I mean it's just houses and staging,
like Instagram,
and the way,
for example. It's a really good way to grow organically and build an audience organically.
Yeah, and it's like, and websites are the same thing. I go to some websites, and Compass has done a really good job sort of with equipping their website, their agents with websites that have a really specific look, and they've actually got their own custom font now and stuff like that.
They've created brand appeal for themselves.
Yeah. And so just know that, whether it's you as an agent in your local area, whether it's your brokerage or your team or whatever, there's a lot of competition out there, and there's a lot of people hustling. We know this as creators, even where a lot of people are doing a lot of things at a high speed. And so, it's not the time to get lazy. I know it's, maybe it's the late night hours where you got to work on your digital presence a little bit, even though you don't want to, because you've been showing homes all day. But again, the reality is 6 months from now, things are going to be different. I'll give you
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, and this story that I'll tell really quickly could be misused at times. And there was a gentleman by the name of Sean Merriman. He was a defensive lineman for the San Diego Chargers. And several years ago, he was interviewed by ESPN, and he was asked why he's in the gym all the time. Sean, why are you in the gym working out every single day, all the time? And his response was, if I'm not in the gym working out, my opponent might be.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, when I read that, I'm like, okay, so that sort of can lead to addictive behaviors, which of course are not great either. But the bottom line there is, if you don't spend as much energy as you should on your business, somebody else might be out there doing a little bit better, a little bit harder. Even WordPress themes back in the day, there are days where I was like, okay, I'm just going to coast. Things are good. I'm going to coast. Well, while you coast, people are accelerating. And so there's elements of that you have to pay attention to.
I think Jimmy Mackin, who you guys know from Curator, said a couple days ago that growth always lags in real estate. So in a typical month when, your marketing and your prospecting probably falls behind a little bit because you're busy managing your current pipeline, and especially in today's market, right? I'm slammed. Yep. I have 16 offers I have to review. And so your marketing slowly starts to fall behind. But the other thing we always say is real estate works in 90-day cycles. I know you're saying 6 months, 90-day cycle, same thing. With each day that you fall behind on not investing in your personal brand or not investing in this prospecting activity, you miss a step, you forget to close a ring, whatever. That stuff is gonna affect you, and it's gonna hurt your pipeline later down the line.
Now, I will say, just to caveat what we're just talking about is, and maybe next week, the Agent Engine podcast will broadcast this episode. I spoke to Heather Elias last week about work-life balance, which is also a very important thing, especially in real estate with the market being crazy. You don't want to race to the casket either. And I know that seems a little bit dramatic, but on the other side of that, you have to be happy, and you need to balance your life. Otherwise, you become a single person who has nothing but a crazy schedule. And there's downside to that too. So be diligent, work on your personal brand, but within reason, right? Like, don't be super lazy. Don't spend 100 hours a week doing something. But like, there's always sort of the moderation thing. So I need to champion mental health and how important that is too.
I finally kind of did what I always say you should do, and like I recently hired a personal assistant, and for me it was, we have a baby, 8-month-old. I've been working harder than I have been because of the pandemic, like working from home, doing back-to-back Zoom calls. I don't want to feel like I'm flying at 100 miles an hour all day every day. If I need to take a break and want to go for a walk with my daughter, I want to be able to do that, but know that the ship is still kind of running. So I always tell you guys, highest and best use of time. Get diligent about your activities. And if it's a task that you have to do more than twice, can you outsource it, and delegate it, or can you automate it or eliminate it? For me, it's only been a couple weeks, but I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. So if that's what you have to do, I definitely think, 100% take care of yourselves, create a space so that you can operate at your best and, rest and recharge. Cause 100%, that's absolutely important. Brian, a few moments ago, you brought up something, or, you mentioned, don't be quick to, drop 25 grand on a website.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know, or what are some questions that we can kind of ask ourselves to gauge whether or not we're ready for something like that, a project like that? And I'll give you an example. Once upon a time, I did a consulting contract for a big sort of national real estate brokerage. And we launched, 2,000 websites across 26 offices in 22 states using a large vendor in the industry. It was a big project, cost a lot of money. And at the end of the day, it was hard, like it was brutally hard to transition our agents from the old technology to the new technology. I think, technology adoption at the brokerage level is still very much a thing, where it's like one of the hardest challenges or hardest hills to climb. So whether you're a small broker deciding on, should I purchase this big tech stack for my team, or even if you're, an agent doing 10 transactions a year and you want to scale, how do you kind of spot check or check yourself so that you're not getting ahead of yourself and dropping a bunch of money on something?
Yeah, great question. First thing I'll say is understand why you think you need to have it. Are you doing it because someone else is telling it, or because you legitimately say, hey, we need this in our business or else, kind of thing? So what is the motive behind why you would make that decision? In addition to that, and most software things these days offer this, is use the free trial. A little bit different if you're like commissioning someone to do a custom website, but if someone says you need to be on WordPress, your first step shouldn't be, I'm going to buy a $25,000 custom WordPress website. It's sign up for a free account, figure out if you can actually use the software, because on some level, after you make that payment to someone who builds you a custom site, you're going to have to maintain it.
Still on your own to maintain it.
Or you're going to be paying them even more money to maintain it. Either or is understand like what are the longer term sort of requirements or commitments behind just the investment, because just because you spend $25,000 on a website doesn't mean the ROI is going to immediately reflect that.
Yeah,
it's going to it helps, right? But the ROI really is going to become more a matter of what do you do with it once it's done versus I spent $25,000, that means I'm just going to get 10 more clients this year because of it. Doesn't quite work that way, because I've always said a well-designed website with no traffic is a well-designed website with no traffic. So that being said, if I'm buying a car that I have seen on the outside, I still want to test drive it, right?
Yep.
Like, hey, I like the way this looks, and everyone else that's cool has one, but I don't like the way it feels, and therefore I won't like the experience. Well, that's important to know. So test drive, figure out ways, use free trials. See if it works for your business. Maybe somebody else is using it in a different way that your business or brokerage doesn't. Mm-hmm. You're like, well, this actually doesn't help us, but now we just spent $300 on a license, like things like that. Yeah.
And then what sort of, I know how I would maybe define the ROI. Like for me, one of the metrics, I don't look at how much, one of the metrics I look at is how many people are downloading like the lead magnets on my website. If I'm a realtor, I might, look at how many people are converting on, I don't know, my seller landing page or my home valuation landing page. Yep. Do you necessarily obsess over the metrics, or do you obsess over, okay, I have this great website. Like, how do you optimize for getting the most out of it? Because like you said, having a nice website with no traffic is just a nice website with no traffic.
I think on some level, either you or someone you trust needs to somehow be accountable for sort of like not the money in, money out, but just you can't just blindly just throw money at something. Like, we know this through like paid advertising, things like Facebook or whatever. There are very technical ways to say I'm spending 500 and it's either giving me X amount of leads, which you can somewhat quantify, or you can say, I know that this has generated in 3 leads. And so therefore it's worth it. Right. I was talking to someone a couple weeks ago and they were saying how they drop like $50,000 a year or something crazy like that on Zillow advertising. And I'm like, well, that person better believe that they know that they're getting it back. Otherwise, that's a pretty big hole that they're putting themselves into. So somewhere along the way, you need to just figure out a system that helps validate what you're spending or putting your money into, right? So that doesn't mean go do 30 things all at once, because then it's harder to identify. Like if I'm doing some paid advertising on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, be aware of what's coming in, where it's coming from. Like, hey, I got 7 more leads this month from Facebook, 2 of which I know went to close 3 months from now.
Yeah.
There's an element of, just keeping track. It's only responsible, to identify what's going on.
And then that's when you can leverage the website, right? If you're spending money on Facebook ads as an example and you're generating leads, you can always retarget them or come up with a retargeting strategy to get them back on your website.
Yeah.
Anything else I'm forgetting that to ask,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could talk about personal branding all day long. I love it. I lean into it quite a bit with my own stuff. I've seen you lean into it with your stuff, which is great. Yep. People in the industry know you as a certain type of person, which sort of validates the fact that a personal brand can really, carry some weight. And I think, just think of people who are in social media or entertainment, like you resonate with certain vibes, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, they matter. I mean, branding is almost everything these days.
Yeah.
So
if I think no matter what, you should always be building your own personal, an agent. So agents ask me, I have my broker provided website. That's fine. I'm always a big proponent of like getting everything that you can out of everything that you've got. So don't go down the rabbit hole of buying $1,000 website if you can leverage the company brand. And I think that in certain situations, if you're a new and inexperienced agent, it's difficult to showcase your proof of success because, well, you don't have the sales records to show it, but you can leverage the companies and the brokerage's success in that local market. So I do think you should leverage the brokerage brand, but 100% you should still be building your individual sort of personal brand alongside of that.
Yeah, that's super important. In fact, just yesterday I was talking to Kurt over at Showcase IDX about this very, very thing. Like it's almost like the sharecropping thing. Yes, you're with and you believe in the brokerage that you're working for, but for whatever reason, whether it's something that they've chosen to do or something you've chosen to do, if you put all of your eggs and you assume that, hey, I'm just going to send everyone to, my brokerage page, and then all of a sudden either you get let go or you find another brokerage, then you're starting over again, yep. Right? If you, and again, back to the diversified portfolio approach, use that because they provide it for you, get value out of it, but also supplement that with, whether it's a blog or even social media accounts on some level, you can do. And there are several instances where I've seen individual brands transcend the group or the teams that they're a part of. We see that even in the music industry, lead singers who become more popular than the group that they started, awesome. Things of that nature. And so, it's possible for those who are really out there. Like, I think just sticking with what the brokerage gives you, especially now, because you're all independent contractors, you could do whatever you want anyways. And I learned that just through our interview process because I was thinking it was not that way. I thought everybody was limited and they couldn't do their own thing. You have a license to just basically blow up your business in a good way, a license to create your personal brand. And a lot of times the brokerages want that because the stronger the personal brands, I mean, I could also, the counter argument is don't get too popular. You're going to leave me. And that's kind of the thing, which is
scarcity
true.
mindset.
Yes, totally. It's totally true. And I've seen it happen. But, like control your own destiny. Again, like what if your brokerage closes? Like they just go bankrupt next month. What do you have left? I mean, the URL you've been sending out all year long now it just goes to a 404 page. So you have
you
to
don't have access to your CRM anymore. Oops.
or maybe your database. Like, oops, yeah. Like own your contacts, own your leads, make copies of that stuff, assuming that's within your legal right. But again, if you've got your thing and you change brokerages or companies that you're representing or licensed under, all you got to do is like change a URL versus starting it all and rebuilding it again.
So this is a little more technical, but we always, like when we set up ads and automations, we always do like Facebook lead, reformat the phone number, zap it into your CRM. But then the last step in our zaps is we always add that lead to a master Google spreadsheet so that you always have a living, breathing backup of where all of your leads are coming from, et cetera, sitting in your Google Drive. So you can easily, back it up, move it wherever you got to go.
Yep.
Brian, thank you so much. Where can we learn more about you guys, what you're building, and stay in touch?
The obvious would be agentengine.com. A little bit less obvious would be agent.engine on Instagram. Somebody has the branded URL that we can't seem to get, which is okay. Personally, you could check me out at braingardner.com. I'm pretty much B Gardner at everything on the social medias. But if you're looking for like a custom website or a real estate design logo type of thing, I handle that sort of through just my personal freelance business. But most of what my energy is going towards right now is building up Agent Engine and, equipping agents and brokerages and larger teams with beautiful technology that's easy to use and helps showcase their brand.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yep. Glad to be here. Thanks, Ricardo.